fulfill your Step forward now and fulfill your Step forward now and fulfill your
Comedy is a comparatively recent trend in major video games. Oh sure, adventure games have been funny for decades, and a lot of smaller and indie productions have played around with joke-telling in various ways for just as long. But major blockbuster games have only recently accepted the risks of allocating some humor to the story budget. And even then, most game humor is passive, even outside of cutscenes. There are many reasons why interactive jokes are rarely used, and most of them are downright reasonable. The subjective nature of comedy carries the risk that your audience won't get the joke, or worse, get it and not think it's funny. Comedy also doesn't translate well into other languages. But most of all, comedy is time-dependent, and when your audience can manipulate many aspects of progression, landing a punchline can be enormously difficult. Maybe that's why snark and satire seem to be the comedy tools most frequently used when a big-budget game needs to lighten the mood. Nathan Drake can roll his eyes at the 40th group of people he's going to kill in an area without really interfering with any spawn points. Liberty City's set dressing can be plastered with all manner of joke business names, and the player is free to chuckle at them, or carry on using the elderly as motorcycle ramps. But these last few years have seen a renewed interest in more interactive forms of comedy, possibly spurred on by the resurgence of prominent adventure games, or the recent surge in introspective, self-deprecating indies, or, in the case of today's subject, finally getting the right media license into the right hands. South Park: The Stick of Truth is one of the most faithful transmedia adaptations ever done, and it's not just because it nailed the show's crappy cardboard cutout look. The marriage of the designers at Obsidian, veteran dungeon crafters, and South Park creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone, veteran shysters, made for a game that took advantage of the show's lore and style to make what is functionally a playable season of the TV show, and part of that success was gamifying some of the series' long-standing tropes. For example, picture the humble Canadian. In the South Park universe, Canadians are often shown adhering to a few common stereotypes. All Canucks in the series are depicted as, among other things, polite, hockey-obsessed, charmingly archaic, and being varying degrees of oblivious to current humor and mannerisms. Stone and Parker also had them share a love of farts and have weird bisected heads, but for now let's focus on a few of the more common Canadian stereotypes. In The Stick of Truth, we see the show's long-running digs at Canada and its inhabitants given playable form during the level Oh Canada. But like any good joke, a setup is required. In the mission before Oh Canada, known as To the North, our playable new kid beats up a pedophile in order to get a passport photo so they can enter Canada to translate a French document found in an abortion clinic. So far, so very, very South Park. Once the new kid acquires the passport, they travel through the woods to the Canadian border. After handing the passport over to the border guardsman, who has a little bumbling scene around raising the gate, the player crosses the border into one of the best level transition gags ever. Welcome to Canada, here represented by every classic RPG ever made. Menu interfaces, the battle screen, and character icons and inventories all carry their same style over from the rest of the game. But everywhere unique to Stick of Truth's vision of Canada, the overworld map, town layout, and even some exhaustible item pickups are drenched in a 32-bit inspired pixelated look. If the player activates a secret, a Zelda-style chirp sounds off. Even the quest breakdown is straight out of 80s Game Narrative Design 101. The player meets with the Prince and Princess of Canada, who inform them to meet with the Earl of Winnipeg. Said Earl will not help the player until they clear the town of dire bears.
It's like a bear, but it's dire.
Once that is done, the Earl then sends the player back to the Prince, who has imprisoned the Minister of Montreal, the only one capable of translating the document. When the Prince is confronted with that allegation, he lets the new kid in on a suspected plot by the Church to unite Canada against him, and demands the Bishop of Banff be killed, his testicles brought back as proof. Once the new kid meets and defeats the Bishop, they have the option of killing him or accepting the man's offer of self-imposed exile. Whether the player brings back the Bishop's balls or a fake-out set from a pig, the Prince refuses to hold up his end of the bargain. The Princess, however, urges the new kid to visit the Duke of Vancouver and hand him a note from her. The Duke, after reading the note, tells of a new fart, Stick of Truth's take on the magic system, necessary for this quest, granted by some monks to the southeast of town. Said monks turn out to be series regulars Terrence and Philip, who, in a frankly out-of-place and out-of-date Matrix-style training sequence, grant the new kid the powerful Nagasaki fart. Said fart opens the blocked pathway to the quest's final battle and the imprisoned minister, who translates the document and ends the quest. The Canada within Stick of Truth is not too precise an homage to be nailed down to any one franchise, being more reliant on a variety of the most common tropes of the era. To one person, the new kid's Canadian quest could be very Ultima-esque at times. To another, the single-screen scrolling overworld looks like every Final Fantasy on the NES. We aren't sure if the erroneous religious plot the Prince fears is an intended call-out to classic JRPGs and their dislike of organized religion, but it was a nice addition nonetheless. This late-game section is a great example of condensed environmental joke-telling. It's worth noting that South Park, the show, has played out multiple episodes in Canada before this game, but with little visual difference between countries. This retro art metaphor is unique to the Stick of Truth, and visually, it's telling the same joke the show has, off and on, for 18 seasons. Look at how polite and goofy those Canadians are. They are so out of touch with our modern snark and ambivalence. But it manifests that punchline on a decidedly gamer-centric series of terms: a pixelated environment, MIDI-esque sound effects, and towns with a top-down view of roofless buildings. The purposefully drawn-out quest is both itself an homage to the go here in order to be told to go somewhere else story arc of minigame classics, but also an opportunity for the player to really dwell on that punchline. These facsimiles of dated gaming tropes even contribute to a kind of internal joke logic. One could easily see how being surrounded by these bygone graphics could contribute to a kind of oblivious joviality. If you grew up in a 32-bit RPG in a 1080p world, how out of touch do you think you'd be?
You know what dire wolves are, right? They're like wolves, but they're dire.
We wouldn't be surprised if joke design is one of the most unexpectedly complicated jobs in game making, particularly if being funny isn't a project's main goal. Timing a punchline in an environment where all precision is handed over to the audience cannot be easy. But playable punchlines are getting back into fashion. Whether it's shooting a guy in the face in a 5-second Borderlands quest, getting berated by our British narrator, or visiting the bygone land of Canada, we get some of the most well-earned laughs out of interactive jokes.
You did it! Now go out and use your anus for the good of mankind!
And don't ever, ever fart on a man's balls.